ado, kindly allow me to welcome Program Manager Percy Amayo, Energy, Environment and Climate Futures Program, for her welcoming remarks and subsequent programming. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily, for the warm welcome. And let me just start off by saying a big welcome to everybody who's joining the webinar today. We actually structured this webinar as Public Energy Futures Dialogues, which allows for us to get some context and some information from our energy reference group members for the Sustainable Energy Futures project here at SID. And it's a great honor to see a lot of them already here on the panel and a lot of you joining us as the participants. So looking forward to being able to interact for this very important session we're having today. The project team decided that we should start off this segment of programming this year by looking at energy policy and the dilemmas of a just transition. Now, as you might all know or not be aware of, just transition is a fairly new concept that the entire globe is grappling with in terms of regulations, restrictions. How do we responsibly transition to cleaner, greener, renewable, and sustainable forms of energy across different sectors? The dilemmas come in because a lot of people and a lot of countries and sectors have been trying to figure out how do we reskill, how do we upskill and skill the next generation to be able to take up these new forms of energy, or at what point do we decide to transition away from fossil fuels into more cleaner forms? And some of these dilemmas will be discussed by the panelists here today. From a global context, we've seen that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change have introduced a new negotiation track which focuses on response measures and just transition. So it's very important to see what those negotiations will be looking like over the next couple of years and what priorities the global stakeholders in the energy scene are coming up with in terms of a just transitioned energy future for a lot of the sectors that we're experiencing today. But there's a very important question that comes up when it comes to the context of Africa. For a lot of people, especially people from the global north, Africa has always been playing a catch-up game. And we've seen a lot of questions emerging from different discourses and different forums, asking questions such as, is Africa ready for an energy transition, whereas we haven't fully even taken advantage of the fossil fuel resources that we have? We've seen a lot of arguments coming out that Africa's time to leapfrog those dirty fuels is now, and that it is possible for us to fully grow and develop as a continent on renewable sources of energy. But we have experts here today who are going to dive into some of these dilemmas and questions and take us deep into the crux of the matter. So without any further ado, and on behalf of the Society for International Development and the Heinrich Böll Foundation, it is my honor to welcome you to this conversation. And we're really looking forward to not only hearing from the panel, but also hearing from you as energy stakeholders from across the country, those of you joining us from the diaspora and from other parts of Africa. And on that note, I want to welcome the moderator of today's Public Energy Futures Forum, Duncan Kome, to introduce the panelists and take us straight into the dialogues for today. Karibuni sana.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, echoing my colleagues' remarks, we want to welcome you here for the public forum here and the engagement, the discussions that we have in store for you. And of course, I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Duncan Kome. I'm a program consultant with SID. And looking forward to the engagement. I think my my piece in this would be to just try and moderate what the speakers will be touching on, and introduce them as well. So I think it's best to hear from the speakers themselves so that we can get the conversations rolling, and you're not just seeing the same faces speaking to you or at you. So first and foremost, I would like to check if Collins Otieno is with us from People's East Africa. Collins, if you're there, can please introduce yourself in 2 minutes.
Yes, I am here. Apologies. So I am Collins. Thank you, Duncan, and thank you to SID together with Heinrich Böll Foundation. Collins Otieno. I work with HIVOS. I work climate finance for a program called VCA, and we work closely with SID, especially on aspects of renewable energy or just energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Collins. I think you should be followed up with Sarah Odera. Sarah, hello. Sarah, are you with us? I think I heard you speaking, but your mic might be on mute. Yeah, see you now. It's breaking. I think your audio is breaking a bit. Yeah, it's still a bit shaky. We can't hear you clearly. Yeah, maybe it's the headset. I'm not sure. Okay, as we give Sarah a moment to reconnect, Jessie Nyokabi is also joining us from Green Energy Kenya. I think if she's in the room, she can introduce herself.
You can hear me?
Yes, great.
Oh, okay. My name is Jesse Nyokabi. I call myself a green energy peseta. I'm currently exploring innovations and technologies toward green energy advancement within Africa. And I'm looking at it from the point of view of technical, finance, and the legal aspect. And I'm humbled to be here as we deliberate and discuss in terms of the just energy transition and sustainability in terms of the context of Africa and how we can be able to move forward as the world moves towards energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Just to check if Sarah has managed to get her audio working.
All right, I hope you can hear me now.
Absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Sorry about that. My name is Sarah Odera. I am a research fellow at the Strathmore Energy Research Center. I'm also a PhD candidate studying energy justice at the University of Cape Town. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you here. I think maybe just to run this from the top, according to the program that we had, we're all talking about this dilemma on just transitions, and we talk about sustainable development, and of course that requires a lot of energy. But again, like my colleague Pasi mentioned, there is an expectation from us as Africa to quickly transition into this sustainable, or you can say clean energy. But of course, there's a hindrance at some point in terms of infrastructure. We might not have the same underlying infrastructure as the global north. And of course, this leads to some teething problems. Whenever we sit down with them to discuss transitions, there's always the aspect of, the financial backing or the financial input that needs to go into accelerating not just the transitions, but the sustainable development goals in its entirety. So maybe if I would shoot this question to Collins, just to speak on the financing aspect of just transitions. How do you see it? What are the gaps? What are the opportunities that lie for Africa?
Thank you again, Duncan. I think it's good that while Percy was probably providing, sorry, let me just put my video on.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah. So while Percy was providing some sort of a baseline or a background to this particular conversation, she started from the point of Africa already playing the catch-up game and the aspect of the UNFCCC establishing some sort of a trajectory where we would want to go. Unfortunately, those particular statements, though very related, have somewhat shaped some sort of financing within the renewable energy or just energy transition sector. As it is currently, I think one of the things that we have to really incline ourselves and be alive to is that financing renewable energy or just transition or just energy transition is largely provided from two aspects, largely provided from the private sector and the public sector. Of course, with the private sector taking a huge chunk of that particular contribution. If you look at it keenly, you have banks, especially since Glasgow, with the net zero discussion dominating the global space on climate change. You've seen a lot of banks, a lot of private sector entities moving towards financing for just energy transition, with JETP program in South Africa, particularly being one of the largest programs within this particular landscape. I think if you look at it keenly, without any bias, then a huge chunk of that particular finance is provided by the private sector. Nonetheless, that does not probably demystify, or that does not negate the fact that some quite considerable financing for just energy transition or just transition is provided by the public sector. If you look at specific institutions, if you look at specific countries, there are some sort of enabling policies, and because I'm going to speak on two things that are moving like the wheels of a bicycle, because the turn on one makes the turn on another. There are certain policy instrument or policy inclination from national levels, regional levels, and international levels that cause a turn on financing. So, for instance, you would realize that, for instance, you have the World Economic Forum largely doing policy reforms that in one way or the other influence the private sector to put in some bit of resources on renewable energy or just transition elements. Similarly, you do have G20 doing some policy alignments to be able to tilt countries, especially to mobilize public financing for this particular sector. If you look at it from the other side of it, and just to answer the question that you have asked in terms of how is it and how do I see it in the future, the current model for financing for renewable energy is more premised on both public and private sector. Nonetheless, you do see some bits and pieces of blended finance. You'd see some bits and pieces of course, some dedicated funds and bonds. Financing renewable energy, and probably we can discuss further what those entails. But you can also see, especially from a C4All study that looked at just transition in Kenya, Senegal, and Nigeria, you see some bits and pockets of blended without forgetting Kenya, Senegal, and Nigeria. You'll see some sort of dedicated funds by regional entities like African Development Bank, donor agency already moving into that sector. And this particularly happens because of the twist and turn within the policy element that either unlock or lock finances for this particular sector. That is how the current scenario looks like. Nonetheless, if you look at it futuristically, or if you look at it in the future, I think much of financing for renewable energy is going to be context-based and going to be if you have engaged with especially some of the research work that has been done by SID, I think if you look at the models such as Mtumba model, I think we can also discuss that later. You'd realize that, for instance, renewable energy sector will the just transition sector would probably be financed on a context-based model. And what this means is that we will have financing models that are context-based. So while we have been mobilizing resources from an international private sector based institutions, there's a likelihood that you will see local private sector entities enticed into financing renewable energy. Then the question that you would ask yourself in this aspect is, what is the capacity probably that will be required by such local private sector entities to be able to finance renewable energy or just transition? I would bring you a very closer example. If you look at a small micro enterprise like Mwalimu Sacco, who have been providing financing for a just transition, depending on your definition, that is, you would find that Mwalimu Sacco has put themselves within that space to be able to, because for me, just transition is moving fast, but also moving just. As Percy put it, that we need to move with people. So yes, we recognize that climate change is here with us and we need to move very fast, but also we need to move with the people, and that is the justice element of it. So what Mwalimu Sacco does is that they're financing just transition within the sector players, that is its own membership, but using models such as waiving the interest rates for leapfrogging teachers in Kenya to be able to transit justly within their context. So I see that particular trajectory going to be cemented quite a bit within the African continent, where the local private sector entities are going to move into this particular space. Secondly, I see governments, especially those from least or maybe developing countries, taking conscious steps to be able to and probably provide finance, of course, well in line with Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, where countries are encouraged to provide finance, especially developing countries encouraged to provide finance. So I see developing countries figuring out ways in which they can be able to unlock their own local finances. I think you can take a practical case of Kenya. While it's very biased to take Kenya because they say renewable energy in Africa is much concentrated in Kenya and South Africa. So probably Kenya is one of the worst cases to take. But let's just take a case of Kenya, where you have a GESIP, a green economy strategy that tries to sort of unlock the opportunities that are there in the country and providing a matrix by the end of it on how to support the transition. How do we mobilize the finances that are within this specific country to be able to finance these particular transitions? Thirdly, I see a lot of philanthropy going into this sector, especially if you mirror the future. And this is probably one of the cases. I think one of the sectors, and I say direct climate finance, one of the sectors that probably have not really been actively engaged in financing transition or actively financing just transition in the African continent or elsewhere have been probably the philanthropic side of it. If you look at individual contribution to climate finance, and that is on another bucket, you'd find that probably this is probably the least sort of utilized means to mobilize finance. Kenya has, and again, I'm going to take Kenya in this case. Kenya has ways of mobilizing individual finance for climate action, where we have village saving cooperatives, VSLAs, if you may call them. But I see individuals consciously moving, depending on the change of attitude that we as organizations are going to put in, the time investment we are going to put in the people to be able to transform their imaginations and thinking around financing for just transition. So I see individuals within the near future taking up, because for instance, if you look at it in this way, Duncan, the last 5 years, riding a bicycle was not very much welcome in Nairobi.
Yeah.
But I think slowly but steadily, you see people biking, individually biking to work. And I see that perspective equally coming in financing just transition, again, depending on the definitions one would want to take on just transition. So I think it is going to be, quote unquote, sexy for people to come in and finance renewable energy or sustainable energy or just transition from within themselves. Last but not least, if you allow me, the other aspect that I see probably coming in is regional cooperation, and I think you have seen specific leaders, especially the Kenyan president, very keen on having what we call the power pools. So I see regional corporations, especially because we are talking about developing and underdeveloped countries. So I see regional pools coming in to put their resources together to see the trajectory they want to take in terms of financing for just transition. So unless there's any other further question, I think I would want to stop at that, and then we can pick on another conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, great, Collins. Quite some insights there. And I've been noting some questions actually and comments on the chat. And I'd want to speak to what Lorraine is mentioning, that, you know, in terms of this being an effort that needs to cut across all sectors, we find most of these conversations being, hived in different silos. When we talk to the Ministry of Energy, of course, they might have plans, but the Ministry of ICT might be thinking in a different direction. The ministry or the directorate, which is handling climate change, might also be having their own engagement. So that speaks to the need for agency when, of course, coming up with such policy. And Lorraine also states that policy cannot preempt, financing cannot preempt policy. And I don't know, maybe you can speak to that, Collins, before I let you go.
That's true. Financing cannot preempt policy. That is probably the best case scenario. The best case scenario. Nonetheless, I think in our ways, it has always been the opposite, where finance has actually preempted our policies. And in this way, let me give you a very practical case of the Kenya Climate Change Act, revised or amended last year. Until we realized we could be able to mobilize finance through carbon markets, our act was just fine. So this is a practical case of finance preempting policy, but it should be the other way around. It should be policy preempting finance, so that the turn on a wheel of policy creates opportunity. Because in my policy classes, what I'm taught is that a good policy should be able to leverage, you should be able to leverage a good policy to provide finance for any sort of action. But unfortunately, in the developing world, it is always the opposite, where you see an opportunity, rush to amend your policy to be able to get into that space. But I do agree that it is the other way around, where policies need to be able to help us mobilize more. And I think these are the ones probably I started with, like the case of IRENA, where IRENA is already trying to develop a collaborative framework on just inclusive energy transition, and trying to see how we can be able to mobilize some sort of finances from the private and public sectors, as well as bonds and the like. I think the other thing is, you see the World Economic Forum doing. They're already trying to preempt policies to mobilize finance. That is yet another good way of being able to work policy to be able to transform the landscape for financing for renewable energy, or just transition, if you may. The G20, the same. The G20 are already trying to be able to incline their policies in such a way that it allows them to be able to mobilize adequate finance for just transition. If you look, and G20, I think, meet this year in December or November, part of where we are keen to be able to look at how they are going to provide public financing for renewable energy transition. If you look at the African Development Bank, especially the country strategy papers, well, I have so many reservations to that strategic paper, and I think that conversation can take another day. I have so many reservations in regards to the country strategy papers, because it's premised on our NDP, the National Development Plans. Ideally, our previous NDC, because these are our sort of our climate investment plan, did recognize just transition, but I think the oomph that it had was very limited. So even mobilizing resources for our own transition would be very limited, considering the policy trajectory that we took. If you look at the multi-donor platform on just transition, where several donors have sort of formed sort of a platform that they can be able to look at what are the policies that we can be able to leverage on, or what are the policies that would be exciting us to be able to put money in specific countries. I think one of the findings, or one of the things that they have been sort of talking on more, is how the gap exists in policies, and thanks to the background set by Percy. I think after that, I think the platform has kicked off so well in terms of the transition, a fossil-free world. After that proclamation in the last COP, I think that platform is now kicking quite fast on how they can be able to leverage on existing goodwill provided by the Conference of Parties to be able to roll out financing for just transition. I think I would want to stop at that.
Yeah, and I think you've answered it quite frankly the way it should be answered. You know, it should not preempt it, and a lot of issues then arise out of course, trying to move in the direction of economic interests, other than, you know, ensuring that there is some inequality being solved from all of this. And I would want to pick a specific case that happened recently in Trans Nzoia, where I saw the governor delivering a couple of hundreds, if not thousands, of LPG gas, you know, containers, and this happened in a very rural and remote area. And I was just trying to think, how then would the rural sort of like people or natives be able to make that quick transformation or transition now from, you know, the much affordable and much accessible biomass that they're currently using into these gas cylinders that they were given. And someone can say it's a handout, someone can say it's, you know, a carrot and a stick approach. But maybe here is where I would ask Jesse Nyokabi to probably chip in with some insights. What do you think about the whole quick transition that is being more or less forced onto the people? We can speak about the benefits, but what are the drawbacks, and how then can we sort of like try and mitigate the risks involved in the opt-in? Because I assume after that gas cylinder is spent, we're probably not going to have, if let's say it's 1,000, we're probably not going to have all of them fully transition into it. So then what are the efforts needed to sort of like try and bridge that divide between getting them to see their opt-in. I believe this is on sense making, but yeah, Jesse, welcome.
Thank you very much. I wish not to put my camera on because I'm having a small issue with the camera. Thank you very much for asking that question. I don't know why you thought I should be the one to answer it, because I have a story before I answer that question. I wanted to give my own personal experience with what you have talked about, that small gas cooker, what we call here locally as MECO.
Yes.
And I wanted to give my own experience. It's an interesting one. Sometimes back, I bought one for my grandmother back in the village. And we didn't have any conversation about that I would be buying the gas cooker for her. So I just went out of my own willing and I took it to her. And I told her, now I wanted you to transition from using firewood to using that MECO. And every time the gas went, you needed refilling, I was always very willing. It doesn't matter at what time, I was very willing to be refilling the gas. All I wanted was she stopped using firewood and start using the MECO. That is for breakfast, for lunch, for supper, everything. But this is where I realized we were on a different level of, I don't know how to put it, because something interesting happened. So my grandmother started using that gas cooker for preparing breakfast alone. When it comes to lunch hour, she will use firewood. When it comes to supper, she will use firewood again. So I got curious and I asked her. I thought we agreed if the gas was to be refilled, I was very willing to be doing the refilling for you. Why are you not using it for lunch and for supper? And she told me, I'm used to firewood. And also, I don't want you to use a lot of your money for refilling the gas. The gas refilling, I think at that time was almost Kenya shillings 1,300, something very small. So I realized we didn't have a conversation why I wanted her to transition to use of gas. I just thought it was automatic for her to transition on my side. And for her on the other side was, I don't want my grandson to be using his money every now and then to fill the gas. So something came up in my mind and I realized we had a disconnect in terms of the way we are looking at these concepts. And that is why most of the time we are missing the point. Us here in Nairobi, we even use electric to cook and we are very comfortable with it and we are able to manage it. But people back in the village may not even, for the gas, be willing to use it like for the 3 meals, that is the breakfast, the lunch, supper. They may not want to go into that. Again, you look at it from this point of view. They don't see the problem with firewood. It's you who has a problem with this firewood. Them, they don't have a problem with firewood. So unless we go to their level of understanding and we have a conversation with them, we'll always end up having very great ideas on paper in terms of policies, in terms of energy transition, and all those. Talk to them. We'll always have perfect ideas on the paper, but going to the ground, things will always be different. As we always say here in Kenya, vitu ni different core ground. So these are some of the challenges we are having where we don't go to their level of understanding and we start a conversation with them from there as we build these policies. We stop looking at ourselves as experts and we meet in a conference room and discuss these policies and we think we have come up with perfect ideas. No, we need to go to the ground and listen to them. And as we work on these policies, we need to work with them. We need to make them understand from where we are coming from. We also need to listen to them, understand from where they're coming from, so that we are able to walk this journey together. And as we build these policies, it will be policies they are able to understand and be able to assimilate even at the local village level. And this way we'll be able to transition as we would have expected. One of the most interesting things I've always seen is where we say the potential of renewable energy in Africa. It's super. Very great potential. Talk of any renewable energy. We have very great potential. But again, if you look at the global level, as 2023, just before COP28, what happened? Africa had only received 2% of the green energy investment. What does that tell us? What does that tell us? Are we having green energy investment in Africa? In the real sense, are we having it?
No.
The truth is that we are not having it, because if you look at the numbers are saying otherwise. But if you look at the level of discussions we are having, even at the global level, we tend to see as if we are doing something very great. But when you go back to the data that is available, you find we are not doing as much as we would have wanted. Maybe it's time we look, or we ask ourselves, community, where are these disconnects coming from, so that we can be able to move with the same pace that the rest of the world is moving at, so that we don't be left out as Africa, and our work will always be to catch up. Because again, during this transition, we cannot afford to be catching up with the rest of the world. We have to move with them. And more so, we have to remember also energy access is still a hot topic in Africa. So we still have another challenge in there. I can end my submission.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful submission. You've given it quite the backing there with your own personal experience with your grandmother, and it's the same thing I've also experienced. And we were discussing this with some of my colleagues. Actually, part of the work that I do here is on African futures and foresight. And when we speak about these African futures, of course, they need to be very relevant to the communities. So when you talk about such subjects as energy transition, they need to see or they need to participate in the sense-making process to then appraise this solution. You're saying it is going to be a full-fledged solution. When we're talking about the gas, there's a question also that maybe Lorraine can also appraise and say, we talk about having a technical working group that can then maybe or encompass all of these other sectors that are not involved, like health, or like we were saying, the Ministry for ICT, that is technology, because then as we move to a different time, when we're talking about digital appliances and whatnot, as we talk about even the emissions and how they affect our health, it would be interesting, just to think about this whole aspect of shifting the energy, and thus we're moving into clean cooking, and you'll find that probably this LPG gas is not as healthy as you think. When you burn it, it has other byproducts like formaldehyde, and formaldehyde is like a category 1 carcinogen, and that's by the WHO. So we're not seeing the full picture. But we're quickly transitioning, of course, because there might be economic interest, let's say from the governor who's been told, hey, we need to get these gas cylinders to these people. But these people then, like you said, they're not seeing the balance there, because they're seeing it as a very cost-intensive sort of like acquisition. When you're getting a gas cylinder, that is going to force you to always, have to refill, and that's an expense. When there has been, like you mentioned, the energy access aspect, they just go into the forest, which is nearby, they have trees, of course they can get their firewood. But of course, again, this feeds into the question on deforestation. So I think what Lorraine had commented there on the need for like an inter-ministerial sort of like a technical working group to ensure that this questions, because one spills over into the other, and trying to get all of this to move in such a direction where there is no stone that is left unturned. And this has to do very much with sort of like trying to help our people, trying to help that base of pyramid to understand what is going on, or what is meant by clean energy and just transitions towards that direction. And this, maybe I can see how that can go into the work that Sarah Odera does, and that is on the need for some education to then help this base of pyramid to sort of like make the connection and to understand the opt-in where they can then see the benefits and not so much on the drawbacks. So maybe Sarah, I would want to understand from an educational perspective, in terms of sensitization or trying to sort of like exact this education to the people in the rural areas on how this affects them, because it is a dilemma for them as well, just as it is for us trying to do this at the high level without cascading it with their participation. So Sarah, maybe you can speak to the educational sensitization aspect that can allow this transition to be just.
That's a really great question, but I would like to take it a few steps behind before I answer that, if that's okay. And I think a great place to start is to really define what we mean by the just energy transitions. And being who I am, I have slides. I hope it's okay if I share.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
An educator.
But it's disabled.
Okay. So I will ask Crispus if he can grant our participants access to share her screen. It's Sarah.
Yes, I can now share. All right, but if it's a problem, I can just proceed without the slides.
A minute.
You can try now.
All right, thank you. Here we are. So I hope you can all see my screen. And so the reason I think it's important to really understand what the just energy transition is, because you can only provide skills for something that you understand what the work that is required is. So generally, when we speak of the just energy transition, we have two main definitions or two schools of thought. The first one focuses on a low carbon transition and with a lot of focus on labor. So what Percy was saying earlier on, we want to transition to renewable energy systems. How can we ensure that we have skills to transition in countries which are fossil fuel dependent, like in the case of South Africa? I'm sure you've all heard about the Just Energy Transition Partnership. How can we then take the existing skills that are being used in the fossil fuel sector and use them for the renewable energy sector, or what skills gap is prevalent? But there's also another definition, which I am more partial to, that focuses on the integration of, let me see if I can move this, the integration of climate, environmental, and energy justice. And technology challenges. I'm having challenges transiting my slides. Can you see my screen in terms of the relationship with other justices?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, fantastic. So maybe just to define these two, because we are talking about these three forms of justice, because you are speaking about the three of them. Energy justice focuses on equitable and inclusive development of energy systems. Then we have climate justice, which is focusing on equitable and inclusive transition to low carbon systems. And finally, environmental justice, which is focusing on equitable and inclusive distribution of environmental benefits and burdens. So when you look at these three forms of justice, the main principle is equitability, for lack of better words, and inclusivity. And equitability here is defined by an equity in terms of the distribution of benefits and burdens of systems. And I put here systems very intentionally, because these forms of justices are not just focusing on energy. We're looking at other things like agriculture, waste disposal, and so on. So equitable distribution of benefits and burdens. And why this is important in the case of the just energy transition is because if we're not considering equity in this case, we may have a scenario where we are leaving other people behind. And I'll give you an example of South Africa, which is focusing on the just energy transition. So trying to adopt renewable energy into their electricity generation. I think currently they have about 86% dependence on coal power. They are aggressively building renewable energy power plants, and successfully so. But what is happening is that even as they focus on including local communities, so communities who are within 50-kilometer radius of these power plants, the people who are not close to the renewable energy power plants and are actually closer to the coal power plants, I think the key issue here is that the two power plants, so coal and renewable energy, are not close to each other. They end up being left behind. So these people have suffered historical injustices because of the emissions, environmental degradation associated with the mining and the coal power plants. But when we are developing renewable energy systems, they're not receiving any of the benefits. So this is a very important concept. Then the second thing focuses on procedural justice, which basically means how can we include people in decision making and provide them with the necessary information to make these decisions. So we've been speaking a lot about local context here, and I think this is where the question arose. How can we understand the local context? How can we understand what people's needs are, what the barriers to adopting technologies are? And we can only do this when we consider procedural justice. However, in today, right now, in our current energy system, we have some challenges. So zeroing in on the question which I was asked, how do we engage with people? What kind of education do we need to provide to people to have this energy transition? I would say the first thing is that we need to approach people with respect. So currently, in most cases, the way public participation is undertaken, or community engagement, whatever you may want to call it, is that we approach communities thinking that we know what is best for them. We approach communities to get data from them, and we don't give them power to sit at the table with us to tell us what their needs is and wants is. I've been involved in the process of developing county energy plans, and one of the things community says is that government comes here or private sector comes here, they tell us about these projects, we are interested in them, but they never give us feedback. We don't know what the end result is. So, or sometimes we tell them what we want, and then we see a different initiative being implemented. And so what happens is that communities start to get frustrated. They may not attend these events anymore, and they may start to devalue whatever initiative is being brought. So the first thing is that we need to have integrity and respect for these community members. We need to have humility as we approach them, and we need to ensure that they are equal decision makers. We are not coming to talk down at them. We are coming to speak with them. So I've answered your question in part. I will conclude with it in the next slide, but just maybe to mention briefly that other challenges that exist is that because decision making is normally undertaken by people who have techno-economic backgrounds. So we always say technocrats. This is government and even private sector. So we overemphasize on energy and finance. And when I say energy here, I meant engineering and other hard sciences or applied sciences. And we don't really consider the social sciences. And this is important because these are the people with the skills to actually engage the community. Then the other thing that I would like to mention is that we have an equal distribution of benefits and burdens. So I've already highlighted an example with the case of South Africa, but to give a more gender-specific example, we have there's a time a mini grid was built in Zambia, and the mini grid was intended to benefit everyone in the community, both in terms of domestic use and in terms of commercial use. So people with their small businesses, so MSMEs. And it was found that this mini grid disproportionately benefited men more than women. Why? Because the women in that context did not have any formal businesses, and the people who are establishing the mini grid missed this fact. So when I say formal, they were not registered, they didn't have any physical establishments, and these are the people who will benefit more from energy systems, the people who have physical establishments. So then it's up to the developers to engage with these people and to determine how can we reach the women at the same time as we are reaching the men. So you've asked me what skills are needed, and I think I would really say we need all the skills. If we're looking at it from a holistic perspective, we need all the skills. I would say first, to directly engage with the community, you need social scientists. So these are people who are able to sit with the community, understand their needs, and communicate them to other skill sets who can then translate them into their various applications. So the lawyers will be developing regulations, the scientists will be developing technologies, developing plans, and the financiers will be thinking about how to finance this entire process, how to develop businesses at a smaller scale. I mean, how to develop business models at a smaller scale, or to ensure large-scale financing can be directed to the local economy. This is not exhaustive. This is not to say that these are all the skills that are needed. It's just to demonstrate that we need all of them. For example, what is missing here is the Internet of Things and data and that skill set, which is becoming very important. The other thing that I want you to get from this is that we all need to speak to each other. Someone on the chat was highlighting silo mentality, which is prevalent in government. I think it's also prevalent among professionals. We're not speaking to each other, we're not working together, and then we don't have, I don't know what to call it, maybe professional humility to think that our skill is not the most important skill set, that we need each other. So you'll find engineers not working with social scientists, you'll find financiers and engineers not able to communicate with each other. And I experienced this personally when I was doing research on public participation, and I had a complete blind spot in terms of the policies and regulations that are present at national and subnational level to enable this. I only had my data from the field, and I saw a presentation given on this by a lawyer, and I was like, wow, thank God I hadn't even published my work yet, because really I would have had a serious blind spot. Then I want to emphasize the fact that as we speak of skills, we may easily say that we need only skills at a university level, master's, PhD, but I think it's also important to emphasize the diploma and certificate courses, because these are first of all, they're the institutions that are available within all the counties, and they're the people who are doing the practical work. So for example, if you're speaking about clean cooking and more efficient technologies, you shouldn't be having that conversation unless you have someone who's fabricating those technologies, and that is likely to be passed at a TVET institution. Yeah. We've already spoken about the need for collaboration, and perhaps also to emphasize collaboration can really work well when you have a multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach. So multidisciplinary, my background is in engineering, but I am able to understand elements of the social sciences. I'm able to understand elements of IT and data science, or transdisciplinary, where I have a little bit of everything. So the boundaries kind of cease to exist. And this is needed both in education and research. Then we need to think critically. This is not a simple problem. It's very difficult. Even speaking to public participation, if you're speaking about giving community power, you can imagine managing that process is not going to be easy. So we need people who are going to think critically. We need people who are humble and people who are patient with the process. So I'm going to end here with a quote that says, and I think it's already been alluded to, the fastest transition solution isn't always the most just. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Maybe I've gone a bit overboard, but yeah, that is it.
I think that's very clear, Sarah, and thank you for your presentation. Truly very educative, and it's just the pros that you got us to probably understand where we are, the skills gaps that are required to sort of like make sure that this encompasses social aspects. So it is also touching very much on the social aspect of when we talk about this just energy transitions. I would like to open up the floor to anyone who is out there with some questions to our panelists before we actually jump back in, maybe so that they can also get some time to pause and pace the conversation as we look to finish the next hour. So any questions? I think to Sarah, to Collins, or to Jesse. Please feel free, unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask your question.
And I add something on what Sarah was discussing.
Yes, Jesse, please do.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And you brought out something that always nags my mind or scratches my back very bad. I think for some times I've been seeing this discussion where engineers, I'm one of them, I'm an engineer by profession, where people believe that energy transition is purely engineering. I don't know what that means. I've never understood. But from my point of view or my understanding, it's not an engineering problem as such. Because if it was an engineering problem, then the biggest issue should have been, we have the technology, the technical expertise and know-how in terms of the energy transition. But you find one of the biggest headache in terms of energy transition or just energy transition is not the technical, the technology. Most of the time, it goes back to what Sarah was talking about, the social sciences. And one of the biggest topic that is ever left out, I don't know why, is the human behavioral science. And this is very interesting because when you go to that topic, automatically, you cannot copy paste what is happening in other continents. If you go and you find Europe is doing something, you can't copy paste and bring it to Africa and it work automatically. It won't work. You have to go down to what I was talking, go to the African setup and understand their point of view. Understand why they do what they do, their behavioral science and why they do the things the way they do. From there, you're able to build up from there so that whatever you'll be bringing as a solution to them, you're able to master and understand where they're coming in and why they need to come in. But you find, again, this topic is one topic that doesn't scratch people so well. So most people don't like it, but it's one of the detrimental effects in terms of if we can be able to focus on that topic, we can be able to move a little bit faster as compared to the speed that we're moving in today. But I'm still not yet convinced we are working toward that direction because it's not an interesting topic, because that means I don't speak about what I think. I have to go to the ground and understand these people. Then from there, work with them again so that I'm able to know what do they need at what time and why do they need to go. And also we have a conversation with them in terms of why do we need to move from this to that and what is the benefit that comes in with it. I think that is one of the most interesting things. And thank you very much, Sarah, for bringing out that so well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse, for adding on to what she just said. Yes, that aspect of human behavioral communication is part of something we do. I come from a background of IT, and one of the biggest problems when introducing any new system or application is managing that change. So change management actually can be very well facilitated by just understanding first the needs of the local communities and the people who you're looking to impact on positively with some of these transitions. Any other question maybe you can take?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for a beautiful topic, and we continue to learn. I want to pose this question on a just transition in Africa, and as we have heard from the presentations, is taking shape in various forms. But do we have any indicators, especially for Africa? How can we measure, how can we assess the impact of a just transition? How do we evaluate progress and hold the stakeholders accountable as far as the just finished transition. I think Sarah even mentioned the issue of renewable energies in South Africa. Yes, it's happening, but we are also having other issues that are coming out of. How do we evaluate progress? How do we hold stakeholders accountable? Thank you.
Sorry, that's a good question there, Chico. And I don't know if Collins is in the room with us to sort of like try and respond to that.
Thanks, Dan. Yes. I'm here. The aspect of the just in this aspect, and for me, while the principles have been defined and sort of put out as several, and I think the last presentation showcased in terms of are we talking about procedural justice issue within just transition? Are we moving along with people? So such principles have been put, but I think I've always sort of looked at it from the aspect of two main pillars for me. I think that is always like the simplest way for me to understand the issue of just transition. For me, it will be: are we avoiding the impacts of climate change within the pillar of response measures and just transition, as Percy was mentioning? If we can get that indicator sort of analyzed and sort of provided it progress, for me would be a way of. The second indicator, which of course can be dismantled into so many other segments, is: are we of course moving with people in terms of, are we just in terms of dealing with communities? For instance, does just transition, for instance, take away jobs from the African people? Do they have a model to be able to, of course, we are not just moving justly, we are not just moving very fast in terms of aligning our systems to be able to emit less or decarbonize less, but are we also sort of moving with people? So how many jobs, for instance, have we been able to create in terms of green jobs or what have you? Or how many people, for instance, have we been able to sort of secure their jobs within the confines of just transition? The other thing is, are we moving with the community, or are community voices actually being implemented within within the broader aspect of just transition? For me, that those particular indicators, of course, can be dismantled as presented in the later presentation, whether we are making any sort of progress in that line. I think the other thing for me, of course, becomes the aspect of finance. How much are we to support transition associated kind of work streams? So for me, that will be some sort of pillar to be able to have a look at. And because at the end of the day, what we are transition within the continent, and not to leave the continent using this concept of just transition. So for me, those are the quick sort of thoughts that would come to mind. But I would all along sort of premise my indicators or tracking of indicators for success on transition within the continent based on the presentation fundamental pillars of but last presentation at you.
Thanks, Collins. I think I lost you there for a minute. I didn't hear your final minute there or a few seconds to the end of your response, but clearly got the jig of what you were trying to say there. There needs to be indicators that can then help us to more or less quantify what progress then it is that is taking shape. I mean, Chipo probably tried to make a relation to, we're having all of these conversations and not just here, as enthusiasts or as people working in the energy sector, but of course, like we said, in different silos, this conversation is ongoing. And then how then do we track or map that to actual benefits in terms of social well-being, in terms of economic interest? I mean, there are some indicators, of course, that can be used to then just keep a track of how we're moving. I don't want to leave anyone else out, so maybe the next question before we go back to the panelists for.
Hello.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, Sasa.
Hello. Yes. Yes. How are you?
Fine, Sasa.
Yes. I work climatic change. I'm also a citizen Climatico International volunteer leader in Juba, South Sudan. Dagan and Sarah, my question is, we are talking about energy transaction. So first we have to do it is to build our institutions. For instance, judiciary, executive, parliament, even our banking system. So if any donor or investor is going to come and invest in us, that if our institution it is very developed, they can channel finance to our country. But if equal to our country, the level of corruption, the level of management of our funds, we as African, we don't have resources. We have resources, but managing is a problem. So what we have to do, we have to develop our institutions first. Two, Sarah has talked about maybe if you want to support our communities in rural areas, what we have to do there, our societies, we are coming from traditional, now we are coming to modern. So most of our people in the village, even in town, mostly they benefit from charcoal, other traditional things. Now we are coming to energy. What we have to do, we have to train them, make them awareness, capacity building, conferences, let these people understand. We train them. We have volunteers, vulnerable people, the disability, people with disabilities, all part of our community, of our economy. So we have to empower these people. If we empower them, then they can understand, then we can provide them with the energies, they can use it, they can maintain it, even themselves can use that energy. But without doing that, Dagan and David, so it is not going to be easy. So these are the few things I want to share with you. Thank you very much. Sasimalo James from South Sudan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sasa. Maybe a last one before I allow the panelists to take those two.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bernard.
Okay, so thanks for that. And it's interesting, the conversation. Some elements I hadn't looked at, being an old energy hand, not just transiting. But I think from what Sarah said to all the comments that have been made, I think for me what's important, donor-led, private sector-led, the opportunities for transition are there. But I think it's important to first understand what determines a just energy transition. And there's been talk of indicators. So my take would be, what are the primary fundamentals? Are we looking at transition in terms of services? Are we looking at service quality? Are we looking at cost? And are we looking at jobs? Of course, I've had people saying, okay, how do the transition affect jobs? But I think where we start from when we want to transit is what sort of services are we addressing? What sort of quality improvements are we offering? And at what cost in order to transition from high carbon, for lack of a better word, to low carbon? And once we address that, then it makes it possible to easily come up with policies and programs where we are talking about dilemmas. For example, if we are going cleaner, are we creating more jobs or are we creating less jobs? But once we determine what transition means and sort of look at in each category, what sort of service improvement are we getting versus what kind of quality are we offering at what cost? So, I mean, it was clear in the case of clean cooking, I just posted a comment. There are things you can look at. In case of lighting, it's clear, but at what cost and what level of service? Because we can go solar, you know, there's all the Mobisol, the sun, but they cannot do what grid power can do. So we need to determine what level of service, at what cost, and then after looking at all those indices or indicators, what do we define as a just transition, and then how do our policies and the development policies of the country align with that? I think we can have a longer conversation, but those are my thoughts in brief. Thank you.
I think we can take one last one for Bonnie. Thank you, Bernard. We can take one last question from Bonnie. Bonnie, are you still there? Okay. Okay, there's David. David, are you available to give your question or remark, comment before we go back to a few closing remarks on the thematic areas that our panelists have been covering? I'm seeing Faith. Faith, your hand was raised. Okay, maybe then I can allow, there was a question there posed. I think it was a very nice remark from Sasa. Sasa actually is a greeting in Kenya. So Sasa, thank you for your remark there on, you know, trying to also get the policy level and the political support and the financing bit of it to, you know, cultivate that environment, that conducive environment that would then ensure that there are policy safeguards so that there are no mismanagement of funds, be it from the donors or whoever. I don't know if Sarah there can respond to, you know, the social political aspect of it and how to structure engagements so that this can be achieved in terms of the policy safeguards that are necessary. Sarah?
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. So Sasa's comment was, I think, very, very pertinent and very true. We need to strengthen our systems in terms of the judiciary, in terms of the executive, in terms of I think the legislature is part of the judiciary. The judiciary is part of the legislature. Anyway, forgive me. My three pillars of government are clearly not working here. But the point is, we need to strengthen those arms, and I think when we strengthen them, we have a functioning system that is, number one, able to be trusted. You're able to be trusted by donors to execute what is needed or what was promised to be done. But the second thing is that you also have the capacity to do what is needed. So from a scholarly perspective, research is indicating that in Africa, the countries that are receiving most of the funding already have over 50% in terms of access. The ones that are not receiving funding have very little energy access. And the reason that this is happening is because of that bit of trust from the donors, and also that bit of technical capacity to execute. Some of the entities that are receiving funding, like I saw a case where a country received the funding to develop a policy on net metering, I believe, and they were not able to develop it on their own. So they used the USAID template to develop it, which is actually failure in terms of procedural justice, because even the people who are supposed to be leading, the policy makers, excluded themselves and also excluded their citizens because they didn't have the capacity to do it. So perhaps in such cases, donors need to partner with the countries to strengthen their systems first, to receive capacity, institutional capacity at level of government, at level of subnational government as well, so that they can have the capacity to receive the funds and to execute what is needed. Duncan, may I also speak to Bernardo Sao's question? I found it very exciting.
Yes, absolutely, Sarah.
Thank you. So I think it's such an important question. What determines a just energy transition? And I think what determines a just energy transition will vary in terms of local context. So you may have cases where jobs in terms of skills transfer is the most important thing, or job creation. So we're not even transferring skills here. We are creating jobs from scratch because there are many people who are unemployed. Then you may also have, like in Kenya, there's a very big issue of land, right? How are we acquiring land? How are we compensating the people that we have received land from, so that we have a just energy system? So what is important will vary locally. We also have cases, and this might be a bit controversial, for example, in the case of finance, where the Global North is not issuing funding to Global South to develop natural gas energy systems, and that's why it's controversial, because everyone is trying to speak about the just energy transition, but then what happens in the case of when Russia is fighting with Ukraine and natural gas is constrained? They now start looking to Africa and start offering funding to countries like Mozambique to develop their energy systems. So that is not just. So I think there's a local approach to energy justice. There's also a global approach to energy justice. And the last thing I want to say is, in terms of equity, we can look at it in terms of various indicators. I think Bernard spoke about some of them in terms of services, in terms of cost. What quality of service are you offering? How much is it costing to access this service? And fundamentally, people will say that if I want to cook, right, I want to cook in an easy way. I want to be able to switch off on my gas to cook quickly, or my electricity or whatever to cook quickly. There is some agnosticism about the kind of energy source that is being used, as long as you're acquiring a proper service, right, an equitable service. But then we also have a constraint that is with in the whole world. It's not really just Africa in terms of finance, and so that constraint hinders people from accessing equity in terms of energy services. I think the example that was given was, for example, solar home systems and the grid. So we are able to get only lighting from solar home systems, vis-a-vis someone who's using the grid maybe can even now start thinking about other services like cooking, for example. And so what do we do in such a case where you're constrained by finance? So the government is now proposing solar home systems for certain areas which are far from the grid. And I think in that space, our indicator needs to be constant, and we need to recognize that there is an injustice because people are not receiving the proper services that they're supposed to receive, or at the quality that they would desire, or they are paying more, say someone who is farther than 600 meters from the grid. So we need to recognize that there's an injustice, but we also need to recognize that there's a constraint to achieving perfect distributive justice in such a scenario. And for me, the best way is to communicate with communities again. if you consider communities as equal partners and say, hey, right now we can't extend the grid to this area, but we can offer solar home systems, and these are the companies, and we are trying to make sure that they are quality systems so that they're not failing before. I think it mitigates that feeling of injustice, even as we have a clear plan towards attaining perfect justice. So to wrap it up, we need to develop context-specific indicators and also global indicators. And then where we can't attain indicators or reach where we would like to, we need to communicate and say why, and we need to have a clear plan as to when we would want to get to those indicators. I will pause there.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I see Katembo there with a burning question, and maybe I can allow that. Katembo? But yes, to what Sarah has just spoken about, I think context-specific indicators are much needed, so that, again, this goes back to what Chipo asked in terms of, how can we then track these NDCs or even the continental directives that we set upon ourselves to achieve this just energy transition. You mentioned something controversial, and that is probably my middle name when engaging in such conversations. You mentioned the whole aspect of what happened with Ukraine and Russia, and of course, we saw a lot of interest then from some of the countries in the global north to maybe try and get some gas resources from Nigeria, and they tried to pass that through Niger, and of course we had some unrest that arose from that. So on the peace and security aspect, it also touched on that. I can see Katembo is here with us. Maybe you can ask your question so that I can be taken.
No, I don't have a question, but I appreciate it because this is the first time to join you. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, as I was saying to what Sarah spoke to in terms of the controversial aspects of some of these conversations, and besides what was happening with the tussle between Ukraine and Russia, you could see that there was economic interest from some of the countries to then try and sort of like channel this finance that was going, or this economic benefits that was going to Russia through the resources that they had with gas, and that can be viewed as something like sanctions. Of course, so you can see there are cross-cutting issues here that just come from these conversations that we're having. The need for sane transitions on energy. I would ask the question as well, if I am to ask a question. I mean, we're just discovering some of these deposits on oil and gas in Africa. And I'd say that it's been within the last 5-10 years. Even in terms of minerals, we now speak of prospects that are arising. And shouldn't we then, instead of just jumping onto the bandwagon of saying, yes, we're going to defund and completely rid ourselves of fossil fusion, opt maybe for a moratorium, maybe 10-20 years for us to then extract some of these minerals in terms of oil and gas that can help us maybe achieve that last mile that we need, the stretch, the energy that we might need to then put us to some sense of development as least developed countries. I don't know, maybe Jesse, you can take that as a question from me.
I see you are throwing the hardest ones to me. That's a good one also. I think this topic is one that we haven't been able to agree, even though I always say we are not supposed to agree. We are just supposed to look at the different dimensions. You realize we cannot separate ourselves and say as Africa, this is our path, the rest of the world, you can do whatever you want to do. We need to look at the whole ecosystem in terms of the global world, what discussion is all about. And this, one of the main challenge we have been having has been, if you look like what happened, if I give an example here with Kenya, where we got like, I don't know if I call it a quota or something like that in terms of, we can be able now to have a market there in Europe. And if you look at what is happening in the Europe, is they are very keen in terms of the renewable energy investment and the products that have been produced sustainably. And one of the contribution of sustainability to them is in terms of the renewable energy was used in production of the product. And you realize to date, there is even a discussion on how some products have been written on the, what do you call it, the labels, that it was produced sustainably or it was produced using renewable energy. So this is not only happening in Europe, it's something that is catching up also with the rest of the world, where people want to be associated with something that has been produced sustainably or using even the renewable energy. Also, I can give another example whereby you find like the flowers from Australia in Naivasha. Those flowers, they do have a very big market in Europe, courtesy of geothermal has been used in their production. Just that has made so many people to be interested in those flowers, courtesy of they were produced through use of geothermal. So these are the things that you look at the global level and you realize we cannot shelve ourselves from what is going on at the global level. That is, if you're looking forward to like having some trading with other continents. So coming back to your question on oil and gas, yes, we have the oil and gas, we can use it. And we can use, one of the discussion has been the other countries, they used even the coal, the oil and gas to be able to industrialize to where they are. And the other discussion has been even Africa should be left to industrialize so that they can be able to reach at that level that the industrialized country already, they have been able to reach courtesy of the coal and oil and gas. But again, now brings me back to what I was discussing about the market. If we produce something as Kenya using the oil and gas, what happens to our products at the global level? Are we able to trade? That is where some of these questions are coming, and they are hitting us hard, because as much as we could have wanted to go through that discussion in terms of oil and gas, you'll find again now, in terms of the market, again, we become more constrained, because at the end of the day, again, the market is starting to demand, we quantify if our product was used using the renewable energy, was sustainability factored in, and these should be even included in the labels. You find even products which declare very well what type of renewable energy. Was it solar? Was it geothermal that was used during the production? So those are the things that are making us have that discussion in terms of what is the way forward. Do we have it at the moment? Do we go through the oil and gas, or do we go through the renewable energy direction as we look to have a say in the market, in the global market, in terms of some of our products? So that is one of the reasons why you find we might have those deposits of oil and gas, but their usage again become constrained in terms of some of the products that we're trying to produce. We want to sell them at the global through other continents, maybe, kind of. So those are some of the discussions that are making us have the second thought in terms of using the oil and gas. I don't know if I've been able to answer your question.
Yes, and I believe you have answered my question in part, because I would like to invite someone probably from the ministry, and I can see Paul, who is with us, to also ask his question while he tries to, in part, try and answer that question in terms of local consumption of some of these deposits that we are finding and we are being told to get off of. Paul?
Thank you very much. I hope you're able to hear me.
Okay, are you in a position to turn on your camera?
I am not able to do that. I think it is from your end that I don't see the button for that camera.
Okay, okay.
But may I then make my... Okay,
Please
just
do.
a moment. May I wish, first of all, to clarify that I'm not saying this from the point of view as speaking for the ministry, because, you know, I left the ministry, but I'm still in the sector. And I've seen several people belong to the sector. I've seen Faith, I've seen others. But let me say this, energy transition is a global agenda, and it is underpinned on geopolitical dynamics, which means occasionally you may want a country to say we have an indigenous resource which we must exploit. But you see, the beacons of doing this are dependent on the geopolitics and what is going on globally. Getting the funding, getting technology transfers that you require to do certain things. So for this reason, we must, of course, keep in mind that we are part of this transition. And I think Percy started by saying Africa is on a catch-up. And the catch-up means we must catch up what is going on, otherwise we'll be left out. And the principle of this transition, because it's a just transition, should be that no one is being left behind. Now, having said that, I need to say Africa countries need to be proactive. We cannot just afford to be reactive, because if we get ourselves being reactive, a lot of things are going to bypass us, and at the end of the day, we will be seen to lag behind as we have always been. And so this is a time that we must be proactive. The other thing that is important, I think, is the local context, which the gentleman from South Sudan indicated, that every country will have to look at what are their local contexts, what things require to be done to enable them participate actively. But this must be done with a good sense of time, because if somebody says we will not get in because we must create institutions, we must do ABC, really the issue is within what time frames, because this global agenda, we have seen them moving and moving on like moving goals. So these goalposts are likely to change and therefore leave us out. Just to your question, Duncan, then do we need to give some time or moratorium for countries to exploit resources? Like Kenya has discovered coal. And the question is, coal could be a very viable thing to do to develop our country. But the question is, why is this question of shifting away from fossil? It's not just a political issue, it's also an environmental issue. We are trying to say survival, existential threat of the humans is threatened by the emissions of greenhouse gases. And therefore, we need to get into a sustainable, clean energy system that ensures the generations current and those coming will be able to inherit a future where there is sustainability. In any event, and I conclude with this, in any event, you know, the Stone Age did not just come and go because the stones got exhausted. The stones are still there, but when you see a better, cleaner option, that is what you go for. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Paul. And I got your response there, very diplomatic in terms of the need, actually, and it is true, to balance out some of the give and take that should be considered healthy to then allow us to safeguard some of these resources even for future generations. And thank you for your comments. Maybe to reach out to maybe to just check on Faith, whether Faith is with us, to maybe mention on, because I saw her mentioning something on the Ministry of Energy currently developing indicators for tracking the NDCs, and specifically on clean cooking. And that touches much on the clean energy transition that we're looking at. Faith? Faith Wandera.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Yeah, sorry, I stepped out a bit. I missed a bit of the conversation, but there isn't a lot to tell regarding what we are doing on the indicators. But we felt that this is a very important thing that we need to do in the cooking sector, because how do we prove that we have actually met the NDC target? And what we did was to get into our planning document, policy documents, to just find out what kind of reporting obligations do we have at the various levels, at the international, national, and local level, that is in the counties. What do we need to report on if we are promoting clean cooking? So what we are doing is promoting trying to develop the overarching indicators, and then trying to break it down into the various kind of data that we require to arrive at the key indicator. We are calling them key performance indicators. And using that data, we would like to establish the baselines of where are we starting from to track these numbers. And we will require that stakeholders in the cooking sector report on the specific indicators that have been proposed for reporting. I cannot give you the specifics because the data is still in the preliminary stages, but we are hoping that sometime we will have this kind of data, like the data that we have in the electricity sector, so that we can have something that also projects targets for the cooking sector the way we do for the electricity sector. That is all I had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Faith. And yes, I think we will all be very much interested in appraising some of those indicators that the stakeholders are meant to report on in terms of seeing if we can attain those NDCs. But there's also something that has been coming up. I think if you have all been seeing the transition from this petrol or gas fueled cars, we're now moving into some electric vehicles in terms of automobiles and some of the bikes. And I was having a conversation actually with one of the people who in the transport sector, and there was a conversation on whether this transition into electric suits them well, and how they can see, like what we said, economic indicators on whether it is profitable for them, is it constraining for them. And I don't know if anyone on our panel maybe can speak to some of the challenges that this person raised to me in telling me, it's not the same as you would going to a petrol station and fueling your motorcycle. And again, now you have to take this battery that is more or less like proprietary. It's like a proprietary thing that you have to keep taking back for recharge. And so they only allow you to do swaps based on some payment that you make every single day. So I don't know, maybe Collins, if you've encountered this, I don't know, did you find it like a constraint, or do you think it is an issue maybe with the underlying infrastructure that is required maybe to get this border rider with a new electric bike to charge his own bike at home, or is it the economic interests that are behind it? I'm not sure if Collins is with us, but I would open the question again also to any of our panelists. And I think Sarah, if you're with us, because you are in the research space, this might form as quite some intrinsic qualitative analysis in terms of the data that is feedback from the ground, actually, from someone who is taking me on a ride.
I think those are interesting and valid insights from your rider, I believe. Transition, I think, in terms of any technologies, it's always complex, and we need to look at it from a systematic perspective, both in terms of the practicality of it. I'm riding my boda, my car, whatever. Where is the charging infrastructure? How long will it take me to charge? Do I trust the person that I'm swapping the battery with to give me a good quality battery upon swapping? Does the person trust me not to run away with their battery? You know, these are all questions that need to be answered from the ground perspective. The people that I have interacted with have expressed a lot of interest in terms of adopting these vehicles, but the challenge is that communication, I think, with people, just for them to understand what it would mean for them to adopt these vehicles and how some of these challenges are going to be addressed. But I think because we are still in the early days of EVs, maybe some of us are not even sure exactly. We are still in the testing phase, trying to test out these various solutions. So I think we need to conduct more research, more pilot studies, in collaboration with both people who are supplying the technology, people who are doing operations like the battery swapping you're speaking about, but also with the community, so that we are able to get results in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and then see how we can scale out our operations. So I think that's how I would answer your question.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And I'm not sure if Stephen Zioka has been able to join us here, because we might need some of your inputs also from the ministry perspective before we allow our speakers to give their final remarks to put a close to this quite insightful session that we've had, and probably already we're seeing what might be the next steps. But Stephen, if you're with us.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Stephen. Karibu. I cannot see you.
Yeah, maybe because I had to join while I was out of the office, but I think the discussion was very healthy. The issue of just transition is very live in the climate space, because I'm part of the negotiators in terms of the climate change issues in our country, and just the concluded SBIs in that is preparation for the COP, which was held last month. There was a workshop that was held on just transition, because it's something that is very being discussed. And as you are aware, we have already developed an energy transition investment plan that has a budget of 600 billion USD for us to be able to transition from, to transition energy fully to a net zero by 2050. So the discussions that we are now holding on is quite healthy, and we have been working together with Paul Mbudi on energy transition investment plan, and together with also Dr. Faith, whom we work together in the same space in the Ministry of Energy. So this discussion that we have held is quite healthy, and we are charting the way forward for the country, so that we can be able now to be in line together with the country. Though we know that we are at some advanced stage in terms of electrification, but when it comes to clean cooking, I think we are very far away from moving from dirty energy to cleaner forms of energy. So as you're aware, through electrification, we have an access rate of 75%, and basically 75% of what installed capacity is from renewable energy, and whatever you are consuming in your budget, I mean, in electricity, is 93% from renewable energy. So when we are talking about transition, just transition, we need to be aware of those facts. We have a target of reaching 100% by the year 2030, and we also aspire to have cleaner forms of clean cooking by 2030. But then just maybe having transitional fuels like LPG and maybe by bioethanol, which I think could be well addressed by Dr. Faith, who is in charge of clean cooking in the ministry. So we still have a long way to go in terms of clean cooking, and we need to look at that, because that's where we have gender issues when it comes to women and children looking for firewood, and a lot of them being affected by smoke in those kitchens. So again, as I looked at your concept note, I mean, when I was looking at your write-up for this webinar, I noticed that you wanted to discuss the issues of gender in just transition. And we need to really, this has to come out clearly, because our women, youth, and our children are highly affected by dirty fuels that are being used in the kitchen. And I think in future, we need to bring this very live in our discussions. That is gender in just transition. Because when you're talking about just transition, it's not only the issues of the technologies. We need to talk about job losses that are may occur when we move from fossil fuels, and again also the environmental issues that also comes into play, the health of our communities as a result of dirty fuels that are being used. So all these are encompassed in just transition. So we should look at all corners that are touching on just transition. And that I think that's my take from the, from my perspective after, interacting with just transition in the space of energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And that is some quite, in terms of looking at what can be done, I'm sure your ministry and directorate is of course trying to pull together. But we've heard some of the remarks from, I think, Lorraine, who was joining us, saying that this needs to be a very wide net when we're talking about just energy transitions, so that we can encompass even those concerns coming in from the base of pyramid, from other players in different sectors, across all sectors, in fact. So we have stakeholders who are looking to this. And maybe just to take 1 minute final remarks from our panelists, so that we can then close this as a successful, very insightful call that we can then see how we can proceed with in terms of activities and next steps. And I'll start with you, Jesse. Jesse, are you still with us? Okay.
Yeah, I'm still here. For me, I think my last remarks will be, we need to rethink, or we need to look at how we have handled this just transition, or this transition previously, and ask ourselves, how much have we come? Have we been able to achieve? How much have we been able to achieve? And moving forward, what is the way forward? We need to relook at some of the areas that we have been discussing and ask ourselves, has it been beneficial? Have we been able to achieve something that we can show off? And moving forward, what is the way forward? And how do we bring out the best that we can be able to do? As previously, all the speakers who have talked have said, we cannot make it to be a reacting continent. This time, we need to be an acting continent. So we need to relook at our own issues and be able to work with the rest of the world, but still taking care of our issues back here as a continent moving forward. And we need also to look at anything else that can be able to assist us to where we would like to go in terms of this just transition. Also, we need to relook at how we handle some of these topics and some of these concepts in terms of the just transition, since no solution or strategy that fit each and every country, even within the African continent. But there is always some results that we can be able to cross-share between each and every country, maybe within different regions within Africa, so that we can be able to move together and be able to achieve this just transition for Africa. That's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It has been a pleasure having you here and hearing your insights. Maybe Collins, if you're there.
I'm here, Dan. Sorry, my net just failed me at that time, but I'm here now. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Final submission?
Yeah, so for me, I think one of the things that probably is quite important as we indulge in the just transition dialogue, and it's good we have Paul here who has been in that sector for quite some time. I think it's important for us to look at it from the aspect of policy finance nexus. It is good policy and finance are two parts of a moving body. It is good that the ministry is already, especially within the Kenyan space, the ministry is already establishing some sort of indicators that can guide engagement on just transition. But it will be very, very important that we don't look at the current financing models for just transition, but rather look at future scenarios for financing just transition, so that we are not put in such a situation where we have to deal with the issue when they come, because then finance will be shaping our policies instead of policies shaping our future engagement scenarios within the financing landscape for just transition. Last but not least, I think depending on whether we would want to engage in the constructive ambiguity of having different definitions of just transition, I think we need to have some sort of understanding of a clearer definition of just transition, and be able to develop our policy architecture within our premise of our definition for just transition. So I think those two submissions are quite important, especially as we outgrow the infant stage of just transition discussions, but also just to ensure that we are not doing the catch-up game that Percy mentioned at the beginning of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Collins. Again, also thank you for your participation. Maybe Sarah, you can give us the final 1-minute closing remark from your educative end.
Thank you. So I want to pick up from where Collins has left. We need to define the just energy transition. What does it mean to us as Africans, and what does it mean to us as Kenyans, or people from Sudan or South Africa? To have a country specific definition, and how can we measure it? What indicators do we need to measure and to track progress? I think that has come out today as a clear gap. And then how can we cascade this across the various bodies? So to academia, how does academic curricula and research, what are we going to do about the just energy transition? Collins has spoken about policy. What is civil society going to do so that we can get the just energy transition? Lastly, I want to say that there's a lot of emphasis on jobs within the just transition, which is good and important because, I think it's part of economic justice to get jobs. But we also need to think about other indicators, for example, transparency in the development of energy systems, involvement of communities, how are energy systems improving our quality of life, how is it improving community capabilities, what are they able to do as a result of having energy systems, and lastly, what accountability is there across the value chain in the development and implementation of energy systems. So perhaps these are just some of the indicators that we can consider beyond jobs. That's it from me.
And yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for that. I think you've quickly cascaded onto what Jesse and Collins have said there on the need to rethink and reframe just energy transitions as we, as Africans and Kenyans, understand it. Collins mentioned the need to overlook current financing models because, again, there might be economic interests from the people in, let's say, the UAE. Of course, they have benefited much from the deposits, from the resource that we are now finding deposits of, and so they quickly try and move us away from that. And also what you spoke to, Sarah, on the need to not just look at the economic interests, but also on the social, cultural, socioeconomic well-being of our own people, and how then that can lead into other questions of ensuring this transparency in the development, and also ensuring that there is inclusivity into the transitional phase of moving away from the energy systems that we had to the benefits that come with the energy system that we're moving into. And I would like to say thank you. I have been your moderator for the day. My name is Duncan Kome. I work with SID as a program consultant, especially on this program track on energy futures and just transitions, which is part of African Futures and Foresight. Also, when we talk about a future, we want to imagine the best case and ideal scenarios that we can shape and then ideate together, make it participatory. You want the government involved, you want all the stakeholders involved, so that we can then ideate on an ideal future, which we can work back towards achieving. And with that, I would like to say thank you, have a good evening, and move you to Pasi to do the closing remarks. Pasi.
Thank you so much, Duncan, and thank you to the incredible panelists that we had with us today. And huge thank you to Collins from Pivos, Sarah Odera, and Jesse Nyokabi. We're extremely grateful for the insight, the provocative conversations, the questions you've been able to answer, and also ask as a way of us extending our thinking on this dilemma of a just transition and what that means in terms of energy policy and financing. So a huge thank you to the panelists. I want to also say a huge thank you to the Energy, Environment, and Climate Futures program team at SID, in specific the Sustainable Energy Futures for Eastern Africa team that have worked tirelessly to see that we have a successful first public energy futures forum in Kenya, focusing on energy policy and the dilemmas of a just energy transition. From the conversations, just briefly, a couple of things have come out for me. I was taking notes and doing mind maps as you were all talking and sharing on the chat box. A lot has been done in Kenya, and really grateful to the Ministry of Energy and all energy stakeholders present here. But a lot more work still needs to go on in terms of policy and regulatory framework when we think about renewable energy infrastructure and capacity building. A lot more to be done if we're to truly achieve that energy transition investment plan to net zero by 2050. A lot of work mentioned by Collins still needs to go into the financial investments and economic measures that we are putting in when we think about the cost of a truly just transition in the energy sector for all people in Kenya, but also in the continent, now that we've had so many people representing the continent also on this webinar today. Another topic, the fourth one for me, was building our technological capabilities and investing in innovation, especially from an education framework, how we train the next generation who will benefit from this just transition that we're pushing for. Another thing was human capital and skills development came out very hugely in the discussions in the chat box and from what we're hearing from the panelists. Beyond that, public awareness and acceptance. Jesse spoke about this transition and the technologies, especially those that we're seeing coming into clean cooking. What is the public awareness that we're investing in? And what is the acceptance rate for that? I think there's an element of research that needs to go into that for us to have that truly just transition. And then last but not least, the environment and social considerations cannot go unmentioned, and energy security and resilience. But beyond that, we see a lot of things happening in the international space that we also need to encompass in how we're thinking about just transition in Kenya, but also within the continent. So international cooperation and commitment, what lessons can we learn from other countries in Africa, such as South Africa, who are already on their roadmap of planning their energy transition more responsibly and more in the front of their noses. And then last but not least, what is the availability and access to resources, and how are we using this in a more transformative way now and into the future? Very incredible questions raised and issues raised, and there is an opportunity here for us to work together with all stakeholders in pushing this conversation forward, but really seeing that we're truly working towards a truly sustainable energy future for Kenya, but also being the example that other continents and other countries within the African continent can borrow from and learn from. And then finally, my closing remarks, I want to talk a little bit about the next step. This is the first of a series of 5 conversations that we'll be having within this year. Stefan Ziokia spoke about us needing to talk about gender in the context of just transition. We will be having our next forum, number 3, unpacking clean cooking development in Kenya. What are the challenges and opportunities? And this will be happening on the 22nd of August. Other thematic conversations that we've also planned are in the sector of nuclear power for climate mitigation, focusing and highlighting the efforts and the plans that are underway to develop nuclear energy in Kilifi in Kenya. We also have another forum, number 4, themed green hydrogen and the green debate. This is a very interesting debate that is not only happening here in Kenya, but also in other parts of the continent, such as Namibia, with huge investments already being put into the development of green hydrogen as the energy fuel of the future. And then last but not least, we'll be closing the year of these conversations with energy prices, energy poverty, and the question of sustainability in Kenya. And this will be just before the COP29. So we're more than welcoming you all to the next session. We will be sending you invitations. We will be reaching out to all stakeholders, especially the ministry, to see how members of the Energy Reference Group for Kenya that we work with under this program can contribute to some of the initiatives that you have ongoing. One of them, as mentioned by Faith, is the NDC review and the clean cooking question therein, and many more others. Feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're also on social media through X, LinkedIn. Our communications officer, Christoph, has been in touch with you. But beyond that, for us is to say a huge thank you and to appreciate you for staying even 15 minutes past the time that this call was scheduled. And then last but not least, I want to thank in a special way our partners who enable us to bring this work to you and these conversations to you. The Heinrich Böll Foundation. This program has been ongoing since the year 2016, and we've been able to see a lot of impact in terms of knowledge generation, working together with different stakeholders to create research and thought-provocative pieces that inform different processes, but also being able to weave the Energy Reference Group, which is really a group of energy stakeholders who come together to consult. And anyone is welcome to join this group. And as we close the session, please continue to connect, to discuss, and to collaborate with one another. We bring you together here on this platform, but we really hope that this also enables you to meet other stakeholders within the energy sector and to collaborate beyond what we are able to offer in this conversation. That has been it from us at the Society for International Development, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the next Public Energy Forum here in Kenya. Thank you and have a lovely evening.